When it comes to a topic like site speed and performance, it's a pretty complex topic. When you think about it, when you go to a browser and you type in a URL, that request has to go out over the internet. DNS has to get involved to find the server in question. That server then has to either find the file or dynamically put one together, and then it sends over, and then your browser has to render it. So there's a lot going on. What we see as a single page is usually a collection of multiple files, such as an HTML file, there's images, CSS, and JavaScript, and how this is all put together can really vary, and it does have an impact on your performance. So this may sound overwhelming. So if that's true, the thing that I would recommend you focus on first is optimizing your images. Usually making your images smaller in size is a win for the performance of your website. When it comes to looking at your website performance, I like to keep this picture in mind. You might have a problem with an underpowered server because the server actually has to generate the HTML, because these days most platforms are using a database, so it has to go to the database and fetch the information and generate the HTML and kind of package up the rest of the files, and your server may be taking too long to do that. On the other hand, if the code that the server is sending over is not well put together, the browser may be taking too long to draw everything out. And the word we typically use to talk about this, draw everything out, we use the word render. So if things are taking a long time to render, it's usually some problem with how the code is being put together. And then finally, the network, the more that we're sending over, the bigger the files that are coming over, generally just the longer it's going to take. And as we go through the rest of this lecture, we'll see that most of the low-hanging fruit when it comes to site speed optimization is really about making the files that come over the network smaller so things get to the browser quicker. So this lecture we're going to mainly focus on image optimization because it's easier than a lot of the other things you can look at, and typically it can get you some pretty good wins when it comes to site speed. We'll talk about caching, because if it's built into your platform, that is something you should definitely take advantage of. And we'll touch on minification, what that means when it says, oh, your JavaScript is blocking, and we'll talk about a CDN, HTTP compression, and about reducing HTTP requests. Another tool I want to share with you is webpagetest.org. What you do is you go in, you type in a URL, and it gives you this waterfall view, which I've shown an excerpt here of, and you can see all the different files that have come over from the server to the browser and how long each one has taken. And so if you have a pretty large image, or if there's some problem with the file, then it's pretty obvious in this view. So it helps you zero in on problem files. It's important to use the right file format for your images. You should use JPEG for photographs, pictures, or images with lots of colors. And you should use PNG for graphics like line art, or like for logos or simple graphics. And when it comes to image optimization, if you're using PNG for photographs, that's one of the first things to fix, because that can definitely make a difference in the file size. Another problem that we run into is, let's say I take a picture with my phone and I want to use that picture in my blog post, and when I take a picture with my cell phone camera, the dimensions of that picture is 5312 by 2988, and this is an Android phone, and that's in pixels, and that's pretty large and way bigger than you need for a web page. And what sometimes happens is that, you'll upload that image and then you'll use the IMG tag to include it in your blog post, and then you'll use the height and width attributes of the IMG tag to scale it down so it fits properly into the blog post. You really don't want to do that, because what's happening is when the browser will fetch that URL, the full-sized picture will come over the network, and then the browser will scale it down. And remember, the goal is to, when you send things over the network, is to make sure that these files are as small as possible, and if possible, you want to have fewer files. You want to resize the image before using it on your HTML page, whether you do that in Photoshop or whether you use WordPress Media Manager. Whatever it is, you want to size it to the pixels you're actually going to use, or to something really, really close. The other thing you can do with your images is that you can optimize them by compressing them. Here I've given you a resource. It's TinyPNG. It's a website where you can upload both JPEGs and PNGs. It's not just for PNGs, and it will compress them for you. And with these two images that I've uploaded here, this is a screenshot. This tool has saved me 571 kilobytes. Other tools that do a pretty good job are Image Opt-in on the Mac and then Cesium on the PC. So check those out. If your platform provides caching, via a plugin, or it's built into the platform, then this is definitely something you want to take advantage of. Because think about it, why have your server regenerate all the files and HTML it needs for the home page and then send it over to the browser? Why not have a copy of that page cached so that the server doesn't have to fully generate the page each time? So on platforms like WordPress, there's a plugin called W3 Total Cache. There's several caching plugins on WordPress, and then Magento has the ability to do this as well. If you happen to be on a platform, or if you've built your own code, and you have access to the developer, something you might want to check out is Memcached. But this typically is another low-hanging fruit that can give you a pretty good boost in performance. Remember, the name of the game is to shrink the size of the files that the server is sending over to the browser over the network. And another way to do this is with a technique called minification. When you look at your JavaScript and CSS, it's pretty readable, but what you can do without impacting the functionality at all is take out all the white space from those files. Now, you'll want to save a copy of the original file, because if you ever need to modify these files, it's going to be really hard once they're minified. But when you're in operational and you're running, definitely these can shrink down your JavaScript and your CSS files, and so they come over the network more quickly. A nice thing about Google PageSpeed Insights is that if this rule is triggered, and it recommends that you minify CSS, JavaScript, as well as other things, there's links down at the bottom of the recommendations, so you can just download minified JavaScript and CSS. If you want to take site speed to the next level and continue optimizing your site for the best performance possible, one tool that I highly recommend is GTmetrix. You'll find it at gtmetrix.com, and like the other tools, you input a URL and it'll give you its recommendations for that particular page, as well as scores on how well your page is optimized for speed. I also wanted to just cover really quickly kind of the next level of troubleshooting performance problems. One really common message you'll see is that you need to eliminate blocking JavaScript from above the fold content. And what's going on there is that when a page is being rendered and the browser is reading through the HTML and the CSS, when it hits a request for a JavaScript file, then it'll block. It'll wait until the file is fetched. and then continue on. Now that can really slow things down. So one possible easy fix for this is to move all your JavaScript references down to the end of the HTML file. Another thing to look into, and this is particularly helpful if you have international visitors, because if your visitor to your site is in Australia and your server is in Utah, there's just a physical limitation there on how fast things can travel. So you can use a CDN, which is a content distribution network that may position your server's assets closer to users all over the world. Two to check out is Cloudflare, which also helps with spam, and using CloudFront with Amazon S3. And finally, if you see a message saying that you need to reduce the number of HTTP requests, there's a couple things that could be causing this. You could have a lot of files, such as 30 JavaScript files or a lot of CSS files, so you might want to look into combining them. And the other thing that could be causing this is that you have a lot of assets on a bunch of different domains, such as tracking scripts that would be coming from a different domain than yours. And particularly this is important for mobile. You want to reduce the number of times that your phone is going back to get assets to fully render the page. So if you have a lot of tracking scripts, evaluate whether you need them all, or perhaps look into something like Google Tag Manager, which you can combine your scripts into that service. If you're watching this video on YouTube, visit my blog at webenzo.com to see my Site Speed for Dummies post to just get more in-depth information on how to optimize your website for site speed. You'll find the link underneath this video.